So the next session this morning is what is cyber civilization? So the first session this morning, we covered a little bit about the history and goals and accomplishments of the Cyber Civilization Research Center. We drifted a little bit into some of the topics that we'll be covering for the rest of the day at this point. But so from now until lunch, we have time to talk about the definition of what is the Cyber Civilization Research Center. And just to make me happy, whoever it was that put together the agenda for today actually slipped in the words quantum internet into the title of the session somewhere. So for those of you who don't know, that's my own particular research topic, and we may or may not get there. If we don't, that's perfectly fine. Dave, why don't we start with you? What the heck is this cyber civilization we're actually talking about?
Self-defining. No, but again, in some sense, civilization has always tended to be defined by people's ability to communicate with each other and the difficulties that entails and creates doing the printing press. There was a community of monks that copied books and very limited distribution, so very few people read things. Printing press changed certainly some aspects of that. It made Bibles much easier to distribute, much cheaper, and it changed the culture, changed the civilization in dramatic ways. I would argue that the telegraph, when it happened, changed the way people interacted and changed civilization. Suddenly, instead of having to wait for 4 months to find out what happened, you now instantaneously got it. Changed the world, changed the economy, changed the way people interacted. I think the internet is sort of a natural evolution of that. Now, I think the interesting question I've always had is, maybe it's a metaphysical discussion, but what caused the internet to succeed? There's certainly some technological stuff, but if you look back at the beginning, it was largely used by academics and researchers. And it evolved quite nicely, but I've always felt that, in fact, the thing that caused it to really blossom was the arrival of the personal computer. And a bunch of kids up in Boston who actually ported TCP/IP to a PC. I can't even find their names, but they deserve medals. I have no idea what happened to them. But suddenly now there was a commodity that people had that they could easily connect up, relatively easy, it's by the telephone industry, and communicate over dial-up lines. That was fine. Acoustic couplers, that was fine. And that really created the audience that evolved things rapidly and certainly changed the civilization in the real sense of the word. Just a little aside, when I talked about acoustic couplers, I was at Bell Labs when the first acoustic coupler was made. And it was made, I think it was 300 bits per second. And some of the people said, we could do 1,200 easily, relatively easily. And Bell Labs management, AT&T management essentially said, don't bother. The fastest things we have is teletypes. They don't go any faster than 300. In spite of that, they obviously said, screw you, and developed it. And that type of thing evolved rapidly. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I don't think you did either, so I'm going to try Jiro. Jiro, what is this cyber civilization we're talking about today?
Well, as I said in the first section, I tend to contrast it with the industrial civilization, with the energy revolution, the first and the second industrial revolution, created what we know, the notion of nation state, the market economy, and all these set of institutions have developed essentially to support the large production system and the large market that needed to justify the large production system that the Industrial Revolution made possible. And things like colonialization was necessary to sell goods that were mass-produced and to procure resources to make these machines moving. Now, the big question to ask is that the set of economics that's been pushing that kind of industrial society now seem to be changing very rapidly. The one factor that I focus on is traceability. One of the reasons why market, transfer of ownership in return for ownership, for exchange for money, that was necessary because the level of traceability was very low. That once you hand something over to somebody else, you don't know where the thing goes. And that's why you had to settle the transaction each time. But now we are living in a world when we can track and trace the silver, whatever called that Pol Pot. The level of trade, that's been the reason why some of the things like sharing model, that business models that do not rely on exchange of property ownership is starting to flourish. Now we come to think of it, many of things are X as a service. Many things have been converted that way. And of course, on the internet, many of the things utilities are provided for free. Not necessarily free, but not each time you use your Google whatever application, you don't pay for that. So the mechanism that's been supporting the notion of ownership, the legal framework, a whole set of that was developed. These were all developed for the industrial economic systems, and that's changing. That's why we are seeing a lot of incompatibilities. We've been trying to fit this clothes to a body that's growing in different shapes, and that's why there's a lot of things that are not functioning well. I think in the end we're going to need a major overhaul, the kind of topic that it seems like June and Paul have very different opinion about the balkanization of internet. Paul thinks it's inevitable and June thinks it's intolerable. And that's actually, if you're taking it into account, that's been one of the major drivers of the global geopolitics, of economic systems wanting to expand, wanting to eliminate borders. Now, in the last 10 years, last year or so, with the Ukraine situation and the China-US tensions, we are starting to see a very reactionary, almost, move that's taking place, and really trying to figure out what the major forces are that's changing the shape of civilization, and what kind of social and technological infrastructure that's going to be necessary for that is something that we need to very seriously think about if we want to keep the world peaceful for the next 10 years or so, because history tells us that when something like this happens, the transition becomes very bloody.
Yes, so far the transition to a digital technology-driven society has not yet resulted directly in conflict, but it was already mentioned once or twice this morning that there's a significant amount of concern that it could fuel a kinetic conflict of sorts. One issue that's somewhat related to what you brought up, actually, an issue that some of our faculty members are working on is in the arena of 3D printing, or what some of our faculty members call personal fabrication. You're often dealing with a design that actually gets downloaded off of the internet, and you're dealing with a printer that was manufactured by somebody. So you go and you fetch a design off of the internet, and then you print it on your printer, and then you turn around and you've created a product. You sell it to somebody, and it misbehaves, and that person is injured as a result of it. Who, for example, is now responsible for that? Is it you for selling them the device? Is it the manufacturer of the 3D printer? Is it the person who created the design? So those are the kinds of issues where the real world actually meets up with this digital society that we're actually building. And Jude's over here nodding. You want to comment on that? And while you're at it, tell us what your definition of the cyber society is.
Yeah, but let me start with the 3D printer thing first, and then I've been working on it 10 years with the Hiro Tanaka-san for the digital fabrication on this space. So it's called the Farber Earth Society project for the Center for Innovation for 10 years, which is basically as you mentioned. Starting from we have a kind of the three-dimensional design, and then the product and the printer far away over the internet, and then creating the product, and then something bad happened with the product. So we call it the QIP, quality assurance, intellectual property, product reliability thing, is how it's going to be applied for the 3D printer product. Anyway. So the different way of thinking about so your question is what is a cyber civilization, right? And then the cyberspace and the civilization. So then what is a cyberspace? That's probably what I want to make clear, that the internet, of course, is connecting all the computers, right? And in this planet. And so that was the internet, and then not only computers, but also devices like a 3D printer, right? Printers and whatever now, and then the sensors, whatever the medical devices, it's all connected on this planet. So it's a truly a global planet-based distributed computing system. Okay, think this space, cyberspace, this way. So all the elements, all the computers, all the devices connected together on a planet basis, and it started the distributed computing system. So this is a kind of planet-sized, planet-shaped single computer, right, with a distributed computing functions in it. So this is one way to describe the technological background. So anyway, storage, memory, cache, protocols. So that's it. And then we still a lot of room to work on it. And what kind of devices we will need, other than the printers, right? And so this is one way to describe the cyberspace definition, obviously. Right? And then society-wise, then we do have a nation state and business companies, regulations, rules, and then so that's of course that's an international space. So the global space and then the cyber distributed computing space. So the point is that today or last year, it is all merged. And so it's a very confused space that we are facing it. And so that's my definition of cyber civilizations, right? So the technology is going to be going on from the point of view of a distributed processing space, a lot of change for the future. But at the same time, and this is a more to the computer science type of development, including the AI and others. The other thing is kind of divided into the nation state, different regulation, unfortunately, different police, different court, and then now working together, merging completely. So that's starting up of the new cyber civilization time, and that's a subject of cyber civilization and researches. That's my definition.
Okay, so good. So June mentioned Professor Hiroya Tanaka when I said the people at our campus or at Keio are working on these kinds of issues around personal fabrication and things like that. Hiroya is the guy who brought the concept of the Fab Lab to Japan. He's one of our professors. He's been working on 3D printing for quite a number of years now. Professor Jin Mitsugi is also working on it from the aspect of how the integration of RFID devices into things and how you can also identify a chain of fabrication, so how you can figure out who did what. And Professor Shigeya Suzuki, who will be up here on stage later this afternoon in a different context, he's also been working on these as well. Looks like Dave's got a comment, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul after that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think most of you know that Monday nights we have our IP Asia gathering. I think that's Pi term. And each week we have a different speaker or an open mic, depending on the phase of the moon. Last week, I think it was last week, there was an interesting presentation, basically of a person who was interested in the way the brain operates, and suggested that we were getting reasonably close to being able to couple in computing into the brain function. Close being that, we now maybe think that we understand a little bit enough to make a stab at it. But that sort of raises a very interesting question of cyber civilization when in fact you have immortality, effective immortality.
That's not cyber civilization, that's cyborg civilization, isn't it?
No, well, I would tend to say it's the other.
All right, Paul.
Thank you. I tend to view this as being that there was, once upon a time we invented agriculture, and that created a bunch of organizational structures that fell out of it. I think that Moore's Law lies behind a lot of this here, in that we've created a resource of computation, which in turn enabled us to have more than enough stuff to put into fiber optic pipes, so that we had this tsunami of computing and communications capabilities that were given to us by physics. And that the race went to the people that figured out how to exploit them more quickly. And that's what's continuing to happen. That resource is continuing to grow, and it's also continuing to go down in price. So that at some point in time, you might be faced with the question of, if you had all the computing you could want, what would you do with it? Okay, you never run out. I had this peculiar experience because when I was in college, IBM hired me, and they would give me the keys to the machine at night whereas all these other people were worried about spending $100 an hour. They were just worried about, how many hours I could put in a night to run the experiments that I was running. I had pretty much unlimited computing time early on. Today I don't want for computing time really. I may want for algorithms or applications or something. And so I think, what's happening is that our existing civilization is trying to figure out how to ride this wave. I'm going to go Southern California and surfing metaphor. You're trying to figure out how to ride this wave of capability. And if you try and get on the wave too early, it doesn't work. And nobody has ever caught the back edge of a wave. So the challenge for us is to try and figure out AS's capability and some of the capabilities that are created from the basic integrated circuit technology. How do you harness them and move them forward? But, I think one of the fundamental issues is, can we be in control and can we correct the mistakes we've made?
June reached for the microphone there.
No, I have a reaction to that, Paul. So Paul just mentioned that you don't need the kind of computing power, but actually what's happening here is that there is the amount of computation and the speed of a computation is good, but around the world, right? So you hear me that this is a global distributed system now. So somewhere, then there is a computation for somebody, and then so it's not recognized, right? So therefore, we don't need the computation power in front of me, but somewhere somebody is doing it for me. So for everybody, but anyway. So don't you think that it's kind of as a result of kind of a distributed computing with a computer networking? So it's all hidden now, right? Of the computation and the algorithm and the new algorithm, AI, and then it's going to be started to be kind of hidden from the people's view, people's sight, but it's really kind of growing. So that's my view, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of this that is viewable, and you don't have to be a computer science person to understand it. All of a sudden the subway signs are more helpful than they used to be. All of a sudden there are screens everywhere, and so that you can rewrite what's there as opposed to saying, "Oh, we have to go to the printer and get a new poster." It's we're proceeding incrementally because that's what humans mostly do. I'm not particularly afraid of ChatGPT because I made version 00 of this once with Nicholas Negroponte. We just said, let's take all the text that we can find, and then let's make a Markov model, and then let's see if we can fool people. And I'm not claiming it's nearly as good as ChatGPT and so forth, but you're trained to look for patterns, and by God, you'll find them even if they're not there. But yeah, there is this whole distributed thing, and we can't understand the connectivity anymore. And are we comfortable with the fact that we don't understand it? I always tend to believe that when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. That comes from the great philosopher Stevie Wonder in a song. And so that's the thing that worries me, is that I don't understand exactly how my privacy is being violated. I can see that it's there. I wouldn't know if the system was secure because, I'm not going to take a microscope to the silicon and see where the gates are and try and figure it out. It's disturbing that things as simple as a memory chip aren't necessarily secure. So, it's going to be exciting, folks.
Edsger Dijkstra is one of the most famous computer scientists of all time, said, I think all the way back during the late 80s, during the heyday of what we called back then distributed systems research. His definition of a distributed system was one in which the failure of a computer that you didn't even know existed renders the computer on your desk unusable. And that's, we've been through waves of that over the decades, but we are certainly at the point now where the utility of that computer in your pocket or strapped to Dave's wrist is substantially less if the internet is down in some way, shape, or form. And when we say the internet is down, as a user experience, that's what you see. I can't connect to things, but there are many, many, many systems and subsystems involved in this, all the way from the physical fiber, through the wireless access point, through the domain name system, through the servers at the back end that you're connecting to. And so there are many things involved in all of this, and it's no longer if it ever was, it's not a single system in which the system is ever always working, let alone that we have any control over when it will and won't fail. And the both of you are holding mics up here. Dave first.
Well, let Paul go because I want to slightly.
I have a very simple comment here. I remember the film company used to talk about 5 nines of reliability. I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm wondering whether there's research out there that is attempting to measure whether or not the internet is more reliable today than it was a year or 10 years ago or whatever. This Edsger Dijkstra comment, I think, is kind of wrong. I mean, I've spent my life trying to figure out how to make redundant things more reliable than any single thing. Yeah. And I think the DNS might have been the first thing in the internet where it said, by God, you will be redundant. But certainly routing architectures and almost everything else, it has that kind of redundancy these days.
Yeah, and certainly the project that Paul and I were part of was, again, using redundancy to get reliability. I was going to throw a bone to Rodney saying, okay, what's going to be the impact of quantum computers on cyber civilization?
We got there, huh? Okay.
I decided it was time.
You decided it was time. All right. I actually did put together some slides just while I was actually thinking this morning about various things. So these slides are very rough and very sort of the moment. But let's see. Color some. Can we switch to the projector up here? Yeah, there we go. No, not quite. So I describe quantum as being the third information paradigm. Okay. So what do I mean by the third information paradigm? And that picture, by the way, is Dr. Mockapetris and me yesterday, day before yesterday, at the Great Buddha in Kamakura. I'll just toss that in there for you to take a peek at. So quantum computers and quantum technology in general are probably attractive in the range of problems where you have a small state for your current system, but a large state space. So what do I mean by small state? So there are pictures up here of a Go board and a chess board. It doesn't take very many bits to describe the current state of a chessboard. You can just list out where the pieces actually are, and you're done. But selecting the next move, there may be 5 options for the next move, and then 5 options for the move after that, and so you've got 25 possibilities already, and then 5 possibilities after that, so you're at 125, and this grows in what we call an exponential fashion. So small state description, large state space, those are the kinds of things that we're interested in with quantum computers and quantum technology. And quantum computers were originally proposed by Richard Feynman in almost 40 years ago, 1984 or 85, and he proposed them initially as a way to solve problems in quantum chemistry. So in chemistry, when you're talking about the behavior of individual atoms or collective atoms, you're talking about how big is the molecule, what is the distance between the atoms, what are the energies involved, things like that. And those computations grow exponentially. Every time you add an atom to the molecule, its state space grows exponentially. People are interested in the application of them to optimization problems also, but the thing that it really started with, that generated the huge interest in quantum and this explosion of funding, began in 1994 with Peter Shor's discovery that quantum computers could potentially attack the foundations of public key cryptography. So I'm not going to go into any of the technology of that, but these are some of the things that people talk about. And a guy named John Dowling, who died a few years ago. John was one of the most important researchers in our field. He called this the second quantum revolution, because the first quantum revolution was really transistors and lasers. So our first information technology revolution really depended on those quantum effects already. So, one of the areas that Peter Shor came up with this idea that maybe quantum computers can attack certain aspects of cryptography, but at the same time we're developing a field of quantum communications in which we may be able to re-secure portions of this communication chain. Well, I guess to be a long discussion about whether or not we're actually defending against the same problems that quantum computers actually solve. But that fundamentally, there are two types of quantum networks. Let's see, did we lose? Yeah, there we go. There are unentangled networks, which are good for exactly one purpose, and that's for creating classical random numbers that you can use for keys in cryptography. And then there are entangled quantum networks in which they're good for many other additional purposes, not only cryptography, but also high-precision sensing networks and connecting groups of quantum computers together to dramatically improve the scalability of the systems. Let's see. So those QKD-based networks, commercial products have existed since the relatively early 2000s. The idea, but we're still at sort of the stage of demonstration networks, not really so much commercial networks. But in China, there's now a network that spans several thousand kilometers from Shanghai to Beijing and scattered out in a tree or a network branched across quite a number of directions. What my research group and what we are trying to build here is actually the more general purpose entangled quantum networks. And the ideas for this are almost as old as the ideas for quantum key distribution, but the technology is substantially harder, and so building it's going to take quite a bit longer. But that's all I'm going to say about the technology itself and the current status. This slide actually already contains some of the things that Dave and some of the others mentioned already, thinking about the third information paradigm. Right? We started with the ephemeral information of voice, and we went to recorded information, starting with cave paintings, and then on to clay tablets and books. But we still couldn't really distribute it. Right? When we got the printing press, we got the ability to replicate information. And then when we got the telegraph and the telephone and radio and TV, we got the ability to transmit it. But we had limited ability to actually process it back then. Right? When the digital era began, instead we first began by digitizing sort of well-known records, and the data was very, very structured. But then we got the chaos of unstructured search, which Google turned out to be very, very good at, and the chaos of the World Wide Web, which turned out to have some interesting differences from what we thought of as the first hypertext systems, with ideas going back to the 1980s. And now we're at this transition with deep learning and machine learning or AI, which is nowhere near artificial general intelligence, let alone consciousness. And then the quantum cyber civilization, that will be our third information age, going from analog to digital to quantum. And one of my collaborators coined the term the entanglement economy, where we are attempting to build a quantum internet whose value is distributing this quantum entanglement at sort of a global scale. But figuring out what to do with it is actually sort of where we currently are. initially, this overall, the quantum technology will impact industrial or back-end systems, things in servers and data centers, rather than something you'll be carrying around. And so it'll be interesting to see how people deal with that. But chemical companies, optimization back-ends, changes to cryptography, all that's going to happen. What's a personal quantum technology going to look like? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. All right, that's sort of that's the 3 or 4 minute spiel on quantum. Comments or questions on that from the panel?
So let's suppose you have this next step available today. 5 years from now, what will my phone be able to do that it can't do now?
What will your phone be able to do 5 years from now that it can't do now, assuming we have these systems today? Little to nothing. Is that okay?
Sometimes I ask the question because I don't know the answer.
Like I said in that last slide, in the short run, the impact is going to be in the back end and in the industrial end of things. And it's not something you're going to see directly so much. But what might happen, for example, is one of the areas that people are looking at with quantum chemistry, with quantum computers, is the design of batteries. So looking at the chemistry of batteries. And so if you can do a better job of figuring out how to store energy in chemicals and then translate that into electrical energy, for example, then you'll reduce the weight of that iPhone that you're carrying in your pocket, or you'll improve the range of electric vehicles.
Well, let me help you out because I'm going to tell you what I think the answer is.
Okay.
At any rate, for a long time I used to talk to people and I would say things like the progress of civilization means that there's this graph and it's going up and to the right like all the good graphs. And it's our capability to deal with problems and the complexity of problems that we can deal with. And that was okay for a while, and then along came effective ML. And effective ML just says, well, there's that whole area above that line of our understanding. And, it used to be, I would say, stay away from that. You got to push the edge, but you stay away from it too far away. But with ML, you just say, I can make infinite mistakes. Not infinite mistakes, but I can make a whole lot of mistakes. And it's really like giving us monkeys and typewriters so that you can explore something without really understanding what you're doing and seeing if you can find a good result. And it seems to me that quantum is that on steroids.
It's not a bad description. Right? One of the areas, so overall, the slide that I put up, we're building systems that we think will help us solve large-scale combinatoric problems. And we know that when you do that, you're pushing sort of farther out beyond what the physical, sort of what the short term is to longer and longer term, and prediction about the future gets harder the farther out you look. Right? But the more complex optimization problems, maybe today, this morning I checked the train schedule to get here, and it offered me a particularly optimal route. That kind of computation we might be able to do faster or with lower energy cost. So today, the data centers worldwide are claimed to be somewhere around 1% to 2% of the total electricity generation on the entire planet. That has been growing exponentially. How can we reduce the overall energy impact of computationally expensive systems? That's the kind of direction we're headed in, rather than opening up such dramatically new particular fields. Yes, Dave?
Comment that if you look back at history, that it suggests that quantum computing will be an added component to our current environment. I go back to one of my favorite computers, which was the Harvest machine, Stretch Harvest, where there was this funny little gadget over there that was actually much bigger than the Stretch, that did a very specialized activity, but boy, that specialized activity was extremely valuable. Okay? and then there was relatively conventional computer driving it. And I think that's probably the way quantum's going to go at some point in the game. There'll be a set of things that it can do very, very well, and it will be driven by relatively conventional machines. So it's quite possible in that many years that I could use my watch to activate a quantum computation that would come back to the watch.
So the one that the Microsoft people have picked as sort of their flagship explain quantum, the value of quantum computing to the world, is the Haber-Bosch process. The Haber-Bosch process is the chemical reaction that's used to make agricultural fertilizer. And it's used worldwide, and again, it's an astounding amount of energy and raw materials that are put into this. You know, estimates are around, again, 1% to 2% of the world's total energy production is put into the creation of agricultural fertilizer. And it turns out, you know, this is a process that was developed more than 100 years ago, but it turns out that there are aspects of the chemical reaction that are still sort of poorly understood by the chemists at the theoretical level as well as in the laboratory level. So if we can apply a quantum computer to actually understanding that reaction better, or potentially finding a separate reaction mechanism, and then we can potentially reduce the energy consumption of this and solve global warming, yay, quantum computing wins. Right? This is, Microsoft in particular has latched onto this as a way to explain sort of the big picture, long-term vision. And they're never going to tell you this is what we're going to be doing in the next 2 to 3 years, but that's the kind of direction that overall that we want to push it. But a lot of the researchers in the field are like, well, you know, you're really kind of overstating the impact there. You're really pushing the envelope on that. But I really do believe what I said there, that this is the third information paradigm, and we're still struggling to figure out what the long-term impact on this is going to be.
From you know, the cyber civilization point of view, right? And you heard my kind of definition or intention is distributed computing system around the world, around the planet, and then at the same time, then when I explain why you put the kind of civilization name onto the internet civilization or whatever the cyber civilization in this and the civilization always starting from the kind of a basic science, basic mathematics, or whatever, and then creating the tools. And then the tools gonna create the society and the civilization, right? So that's basically what the civilization is. So it's always origin is like very much primitive and then the important science to start up. And in that sense, so I kind of very much a big fan that the quantum internet being a part of kind of a cyber space creation about the planet level distributed computing thing, for the future benefit, given by the quantum internet thing. That's a kind of which I'm thinking about, but I wonder. If that route about the basic science, mathematics or whatever, and then the creating the tools and the civilization, okay, that steps. So the origin of the quantum, computing and the quantum information is a little bit different origin, being a science, right? So you wanna. I mean, after Dave and myself leave the CCRC, do you want the CCRC to be a quantum civilization laboratory or what?
You read my mind. I'm figuring out how to revise the name of the Cyber Civilization Center, the research center there. I actually have one thing. So far we've been sort of a little bit on the sort of upbeat side of things. I wanted to bring up one thing here. Let's see, Colin, can you put up the let's see, not that. Where did my photos go? Where did the photos go? All right. There we go. This chart went around in last night's NHK special. It was talking about revival of Japan. And for those of you who don't read Japanese, the sets of bars left to right here are France, Germany, the US, and Japan. And what's being plotted here is the amount of investment in human resource development. And those numbers are in percent of something, percent of GDP, I believe, but I'm a little fuzzy on what's included in that, what's not. And it seems to show that France, Germany, and the US are investing 1 to 2% of their overall GDP in human resource development, whereas Japan is just a minuscule and dropping fraction. And in particular, the context in which this was brought up last night in the NHK special was the investment in companies as opposed to the university-based education system. But I think both are included in this chart. I'm a little fuzzy on that. Kokuryo Sensei, do you have any comments on sort of, this goes back to our discussion from the first session this morning about education. Where are we and where do we need to be in terms of these sorts of things?
Yeah, so this yes, I truly believe this is a big issue, at least in the Japanese context. And I also believe that you said this number includes investment within companies.
That was the focus of the discussion during the television show last night, although they didn't explain in detail what's included and excluded in this chart. So I'm not certain this chart is actually apples to apples in this. So that's the first concern. But
okay, here again, I see the Japan stuck with the old success model. I mean, of course, in the 80s, Japanese companies like, when I joined NTT, they invested a huge amount to me in terms of both during the working time. They also funded me to go to get my degree in the US. Also, so a lot of investment within companies, assuming that I would stay for 30, 40 years, which I didn't. So that's, but many other people did. So that kind of model was very successful, but that doesn't get reflected in the amount of people. I mean, like that's one of the reasons why the professional graduate schools have not developed in Japan as much as in some in other places. That's not to say that we don't have to do it, because we live in a totally different world now, and the amount of I mean we need to, and the technology. I mean you cannot rely on knowledge that you learned in your 20s forever. That you have to continue absorbing new knowledge. So sort of going back and forth, educational institutions and practice. So I think the statistics may not be accurate. At the same time, I think it reflects the fundamental structural problem that exists in Japan. Having said that, I think this is a global issue too. That the cost of, like, for example, education in the U.S. I mean, the amount of debt that people assume, at the time of graduation, that's a global issue, and we in the educational institution have to really think about how we deliver knowledge to people. Right now, I think we are a institution of higher education is becoming a vehicle for expanding the gap, and we really need to be institution give opportunities for the less advantaged people to really prove their capability. So
Otherwise, we're wasting resources.
yeah. So
Paul, as the main industry representative here on this stage and a senior person, and this is probably your last chance to speak up here on the stage during the day today, unless we pull you into something else later. So what do you see, from your point of view in the industry, how do you see both the research community and the education work that's being done by universities? Is it sufficient? Are there things that, how do we need to change at the university level?
I think that the thing that bothers me the most about this whole how to structure universities and debt and so forth is that it's an investment process, and what you want to do is make good investments. But it's if you're spending somebody else's money, spending other people's money, you don't care whether or not you make good investments. So I think we need to figure out who's actually funding the process and what can we do to have them make better investment decisions. And it may be that if it's public policy, yeah, we need 3% publics, I'm sorry. If you're filled with 3%, sorry. It's not, the public isn't going to pay for it. And we also ought to figure out what the efficiency of the education process is. And I don't think we do a fairly good job of doing what Deming would do if he ran the Department of Education. But I have no way of, I understand that the debt process and education is broken and, immigration is broken. But I think it's a question of figuring out how to make better investments, regardless of who's making them.
Can I make a comment, a brief comment?
Yeah, and after that, after we get a comment from Dave, Professor Thiesmeyer is online and she has a question.
I'm now speaking from an American perspective. I'm on the board of trustees of my alma mater, so I see the books and the way universities operate. And we've gotten ourselves into a funny position in the U.S. where the president of university makes more money than the president of a watch company.
Maybe the football coach.
Maybe even the football coach. Yeah, well, it depends on the university. And there's been this, largely forced by the government rules, this creation of a huge bureaucracy, which is largely involved in satisfying government requirements. And when you look at the bottom, the actual education process is relatively lightly funded. Relatively. Better funded than I think in Japan, but still relatively lightly funded, and that's causing a lot of problems in the U.S. But the thing I find interesting is considering the relative poorness of our primary secondary in the U.S., the universities do very, very well. Before you dismiss everybody, I have a meta comment to make about following on. Okay.
We actually have an online question that I want to get to before we wind up. Okay, so can we get, it should be our Professor Lynn Thiesmeyer is online. Do you have a question?
Yes. Good morning, everyone, colleagues old and new, and I feel very happy at this 5th anniversary meeting at what I'm hearing. Going back to something all of you were pointing to, and Professor Kokuryo just most recently said about higher education becoming a vehicle to widen certain gaps. There are certain things about digital technology, not the technology itself, but the internet and distributed internet that seem to be, if not widening gaps directly, are certainly not doing enough, since we're talking about what more should we do, right? And as most of you know, I work in very impoverished areas of Southeast Asia and some parts of East Asia as well. it's not true that millions of people have come out of poverty. Millions more people have entered poverty recently for various reasons, including just natural population increase. And millions of people always have been unable to access the internet. The World Bank and the ITU estimate over 3 billion people, close to half our world population, don't have meaningful or regular access to the internet, even for the basic daily necessities that we used to promote. You know, how do you find a job? How do you communicate with your family who's gone to work somewhere else, whatever. None of this. And then because of cyber conflict or other kinds of conflict, they're not willing to access Wi-Fi even because it's unsafe. So that's what I've been working on for the last 2 years, and I would love to sit down with any or all of you again and talk about how we can push these things forward. Today, everything I've heard has said that, okay, yes, now we're at the stage where we realize what needs some improvement. So I'd like to add my 2 cents on that point. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for excellent presentations.
That's actually an excellent point. We're sitting here in a very privileged position in a first-rate university in one of the leading countries in the world, and with that position comes a lot of responsibility as well for not pushing things forward without leaving other people behind. We do have a couple of questions here, so what should we do? It's 3 minutes to. You want to take these questions here? All right, let's take a question. Yeah. Maybe this mic works better.
Thank you. You're not only in some university, like civilization introduction, what is civilization to Japan. That was, of course, Fukuzawa Yukichi, and the founder of this university, and you, Jiro, wrote Cyber Boomerang, and so probably the center should not be renamed because of this civilizational background of this university. But what are concrete implications when talking about civilization given the inequalities? Because then, when Fukuzawa introduced the concept of civilization, it was not uniformly distributed. Japan ascended to this civilizational status first by international crediting and by considering itself progressed. So what about the unequal distribution of cyber civilization worldwide, and what about Keio University being in a good place to research this and to think about this?
I'm really glad, with the following up, that follows on from Professor Tiesmeyer's question very well. June, do you want to comment on that? Yeah.
Maybe Jiro first.
Maybe Jiro first.
Yeah, I can follow.
Well, thanks, and I think we do not want to monopolize, but I think there's I think there's a significant value in us doing this in this part of Asia. So that Asia should have a voice in this. That there's a lot of value in dialogue among the cultures of different values, because we need to be building a better world, of course, and I think there's a value in having people like Dave come here and disseminate the thoughts from this part of the world. So thank you very much, and I hope that solves. Professor Tiesmeyer, thank you very much. That we hope to be a solution, knowing that technology can work both ways.
Well, actually, the role of universities for this issue and so I don't believe that. It's difficult to say here, but not very much university role, right? and necessary. So you mentioned about the knowledge delivery. I don't think this complicated the space of a cyber civilization. Then it's a very important that the people who's facing with the issue and the willingness to create new things, they will mutually educated learning each other. So this is a kind of a type of education we're going to need. I mean, so because a lot of any kind of micro silos, huge silos, whatever the silos, I mean, country silos, and so it's really important to share and exchange and learning each other type of a thing is going to be necessary. So the university education itself is changing toward that direction very much. So in that sense, the unconnected people, so we call it the internet inclusion, and those people who participate on the internet, then they know what they're going to do. So in the 20 years ago, then we've been working on connecting everybody. But now we are not only connecting the people, but also the people who going to participate on kind of economics, the creation and other things. So I think it's the creating the environment to learn each other, learn from others, is going to be very important. I don't believe that university's role. I mean, only university can do the role. So, but there is a new system and the environment for the people to learn to avoid that kind of thing. By the way, those graphs that you showed from NHK last night, the amount of the percentage from a GDP, right? So it's a matter of who's paying for that, right? So the private investor like us, it's basically not government, but then government sometimes spending a lot of money, and the industry is spending a lot of money for you.
Yeah, you always have to be careful what you include and what you don't. Let's take one final question here, and then.
Thank you for this excellent panel. And from Paul's presentation, I realized that cyberspace today is different in many ways from what you may have expected 30 or 50 years ago. So my question is to any panelists, what do you regret most? Or is there any specific thing you wish to rewind the time and do it over again? I had a same discussion with one of a person who's known as a father of Korean internet. He said it was ridiculous to have only 32-bit address spaces when you like to connect the entire world.
Yeah, I have a talk that I give to people frequently, students, and the title of the talk is, check your axioms. So that, for example, one of the fundamental axioms that was wrong with the DNS was that, I had been infatuated with the LSI world and Moore's Law and fiber optics and all that. There's a sea of bandwidth coming. And I was absolutely right about that. But the implication that I would continue to have to deal with 500-byte packets, I always figured that the packets were going to get bigger. I mean, why not? And they didn't. And we still suffer today about trying to squeeze things through some small packets. Okay, so that was a mistake. I sometimes wonder, I disclaimed responsibility for the administration of the DNS. I got into a bunch of battles early on where people said, the top level domains have to be countries and only countries. And I said, no, don't. Next. The top levels have to be phone companies. So we would have names ending in MCI now, I guess. And I said, nope. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build something where you're completely free to do whatever you want. You can put your pet names up there, you can put countries, whatever. And my last policy battle that I was quite proud of was I said, we're going to have top-level domains that are not country codes, in addition. And one of my friends who was regulating me from the US government argued with me over and over again. And then finally said, all right, have your .com, but nobody's going to use it. He's somebody we all know, but I don't quote his name for obvious reasons. At any rate, I wonder whether or not it would have been possible to steer the discussion about the way domain names as intellectual property got allocated, because that's really what's going on there. And it's, in some ways it was the first cryptocurrency. Could we have done something better and something that was a little bit more enlightened? I don't know, I asked myself that, but I sort of feel like I should have done more.
All right, thank you for that. Dave, you want to make a final comment on this panel before we close for lunch?
I was going to make a comment on the afternoon. Say again? One of the problems in organizing this is that we wanted to be worldwide, which with time zones is a nightmare, believe me. So we tried to organize it so that different aspects, different parts of the world could easily view different segments of this conference. But everything is recorded, everything will be put online. So if you have to sleep or don't feel like watching at 3 in the morning, we understand. This afternoon we have a bunch of rather interesting sessions with Joey and the press with Dan, and my favorite topic, which is escalation scenarios in the afternoon with Katharina. And we invite all of you to either attend physically, stay up overnight, or go to sleep and watch us afterwards. And it's lunchtime now, and we start at...
The schedule says 1 o'clock. We only allocated 60 minutes for lunch. It's 12:09 now, so let's shoot for 1:10 p.m. with sort of a soft start on that. But our first speaker after lunch is Joy Ito, and you don't want to miss that. So 60 minutes for lunch. Hustle and get back, and we'll see you all in an hour.